Now, it's 10:54, and it's a Thursday, and this lecture today is about Easter Island. And the problem is with a lecture about Easter Island is that I'm trying to fit everything in about a whole civilization into 2 hours, which is not fair in regards to the people of Rapa Nui. And that's how we're going to refer to them from this moment onwards. The word Easter Island is a Western term. The local people call the island Rapa Nui, which means big Rapa. With many lectures, there is the onerous contribution that you can either make or not make. And when we think about a site like this, there is seemingly very little about the people's houses that you can actually glean from. It's all about the heads, and it's all about the misunderstanding of those heads, and it's also about the misunderstanding of this culture. Lots of television programs usually get the portrayal of Rapa Nui completely wrong. And in lots of ways, we're going to address some of that today. So what we need to say is that this will be a journey of reinvention. And if I may ask, Eleanor, I would like you to disagree or agree with anything I've got to say. If you do agree with what I've got to say, and as you've been to this big island, in a way that might surprise me, it might not surprise me. Everyone's got a different take on these things. According to radiocarbon dates, the structures that we see are the earliest phases at Rapa Nui date all the way back to AD 600. But we're also told that we're not sure who these people are. And I think that's a question that we're not really going to address today. But we know that there's civilization on the island at least AD 600. We think that people are heading to the island immediately the years after the birth of Christ. So we might have evidence of people being on the island for 2,000 years or even longer. You do see some television programs that actually maintain that the statues at Easter Island are much older than archaeologists and radiocarbon dates give them credit for. At the start of this, albeit that I've actually done this lecture 3 other times this week, the words mud and the word trees spring to mind. The reason why mud and trees spring to mind, those are the clues to understanding something towards what the statues mean. And when we think about trees, it would not be unacceptable to accuse me of saying in the past that trees and the cutting down of the trees were responsible for the collapse of the Easter Island civilization. In fact, that statement is completely wrong now. It's very likely that lots of the trees that we believe were cut down by the people of Rapa Nui were cut down by Westerners after the Rapa Nuian culture was destroyed by Western influence, which puts a different taint on this wonderful island. The island itself is 2,328 miles away from mainland South America. If you want to add a couple of miles on there, approximately 2,500 miles from nearest land. It's one of the most isolated islands on the planet. And in the archaeological record, it's believed that one group of people settled on the island, and one group of people grew a culture on the island. One group of people that constructed these buildings, these little villages. One group of people were responsible for the Birdman, and you know it. The same group of people were responsible for the erection of the statues. So I've started off with an image that you wouldn't usually see, because isn't it the sexiest thing to see those statues? But also the people who constructed those, who carved away those statues and erected those statues, and their homes and their pottery and their tools are equally as important as the great achievements that you see in regards to the heads. But they're not just heads, they're a lot more than that. So here's the island of Rapa Nui, Easter Island. And immediately what you can see is a huge crater on the left-hand side of the screen. Now that crater is associated with a Birdman. And that's also the place that rings a bell is Orango. And that comes into the later stages of these people who lived on this island. But you can see all the little dots on the screen. Let's just sort of enlarge a little bit more. All these little dots on the screen indicate very dormant or extinct volcanoes. But this area is of particular interest in regards to those statues, which we'll go on to. Now, going by my notes in front of me, I've indicated that it was only one influx of people that headed towards the island, maybe 2,000 years ago. Is that fact or fiction? One thing that has to be fact is that the people on the island remained in the same culture and developed that culture independently of any other civilization on the planet. These people were determinists, not diffusionists. Basically, a diffusionist is somebody that heads out of Egypt and uses Egyptian technology somewhere else. That's a diffusionist. A determinist is somebody who goes somewhere, who doesn't think about erecting huge statues like this, but then eventually these statues are erected without outside help. How did these people get to this very remote island? By accident? Or were there waves of people who got there by accident? The archaeology is telling us there weren't waves of people who got there by accident. How they got there from South America, mainland South America, was an experiment that the likes of Thor Heyerdahl wished to prove or disprove. And Kontiki and I, this first edition that I have in front of me, tells of the stories of Thor Heyerdahl building a raft and then having a crew on board that raft, heading out into the ocean, heading from the cold to the warm currents, using modern technology, but against the ancient seas, using the fish and turtles in the sea as a harvest, and eventually heading all the way through to some little barren islands and eventually heading to Easter Island itself. So the Kontiki expedition is a wonderful expedition. And what we did learn is it was possible to actually do this. And then what we've got is Thor Heyerdahl writing other books. He's heading across the Indian Ocean, and you've got all these different stories of him proving that it was quite possible to head out into the sea and get to these isolated land masses. But Thor Heyerdahl wasn't taking family with him. He wasn't taking chickens and pigs with him. And he wasn't out on a journey that could possibly take up to months. I don't really know the facts and figures, but it's quite likely that the people who head out from South America took between 25 and 50 days to actually get to Easter Island. Within that time, they would have had to have fed themselves. They would have had to have had enough water on board. They would have had to have kept their animals going. They would have had to have kept those sweet potatoes and the breadfruit plants going, and so on and so on. But they eventually got there. They didn't know where they were going. And they were probably part of a group of people who were just setting out from South America with the thought of finding new land, very much as those explorers did later on. In 1722, the Dutch navigator Jacob Roggeveen encountered and christened the island Easter Island because he arrived there on Easter Sunday. But this was in 1722. It would be another 50 years before Westerners got there. Within those 50 years, it's said that civilization on Rapa Nui continued. But subsequent expeditions there from the 1770s onwards decimated the people, caused them to die of terrible illnesses. From a population into their thousands, a population then went into the hundreds. And do you know what we did as Westerners? We claimed that the population was already on decline when we got there. That was a complete lie, it turns out. In fact, when Westerners got there, it was a thriving civilization and there were trees still standing. It was us as Westerners that cut down those trees. And we also enslaved thousands of people on the island as well. So, again, those heads looking out, inland, some out to sea. So this wonderful map. So what we're going to do, Eleanor, is Orango or Oranga. You will have been there. I know that because I've seen photographs. Did you actually get to any of these wonderful peaks, like the Taravaka, which is 500 meters above sea level? Did you go there?
No, we didn't actually go up on that. No, we went up near that area. We went to this over here where you're pointing now, where the quarry, where they quarried the stone, the actual Moai.
Rana Raraku. That's where you went. Now that's a really interesting question. The really interesting question is: were the 1,000 statues on the island all quarried in this locality? Yeah, exactly. It is over that. Were they all quarried in this locality? And my answer, yes, my answer. Go on and tell us the answer. The answer.
Well, I believe so. Yes.
I would actually disagree with that.
All right. Okay.
And the reason why I would disagree with that is that these statues had to be moved all the way across the island. And the other thing as well is that there's lots of other areas where they could excavate equally as fine stones. So that's an interesting point. And you know, one thing that I'm going to say today, Eleanor, is actually, I don't believe that these statues were all meant to go to the places that they were meant to go. What we're talking about, I believe that the act of carving the statues was actually the act itself, which we'll go on to, which is quite a strange concept, but it's one concept the archaeologists have been looking at. So there you go, Easter Island. It's exceedingly isolated. It's so isolated that, you know, it's one of the most isolated localities on the planet, but people naturally live there. And due to the various currents, they found this island and they occupied this island for a good chunk of time. Moving on a little bit more. So, here we go. That's a little bit more clear. It's showing Ranu Raraku a bit more clearly, and Motunui, which is basically the island that the Birdman would like to swim out to. Now, you look at these wonderful images and you see these statues either looking out to sea or looking inland, which is really two very, very interesting concepts. They're various sizes. And you know what? I'm going to read something out to you that when we actually do these lectures, there's always questions. And one question was, why are they all male figures? And the answer is no, they're not. There were actually female Easter Island figures as well. So I'm hopefully going to find this text. Here we go. Let's read this out. This is directly from a text. Really interesting. So on Monday, when we did this on Monday, somebody said, were there female Easter Island figures? And I say, I don't know. So we actually searched this, and there did turn out there are female stone figures on Easter Island, and there could actually be hundreds of them. So here we go. During work on Easter Island in 1957, 1958, the scientific mission of the University of Chile devoted part of its archaeological activities to excavations in Rano Raraku, which is the quarry site for most of the stones that we see being carved on the island. Among the results obtained, the discovery of female stone figures. These deserve a mention, naturally. Female stone figures, amazingly enough, they're not all male. Great, because male archaeologists have been obsessed with the fact that they were all male figurines and this was a male-dominated island. Not so. Two particular cases excavated at Rano Raraku were sculptures of two female carved figures. These were set up in a vertical position on the outward slope of Rano Raraku. Other figures still under construction were investigated in the quarry. Now, this is a really nice description. Moai statue 277 is a figure just at the foot of the southern outward slope of Rano Raraku, which had been buried almost up to the breast in a standing and slightly leaning position. When excavating the front of the sculpture, it became evident that this monument represented a female, characterized by a neatly carved vulva shown between the slender fingertips of the elongated hands. The body did not exhibit further peculiarities. The circular shaped navel corresponding to the standard pattern known from male stone figures. So it starts to make you wonder whether these do represent male stone figures at all, or may they represent figures that don't have a sense of sexuality about them. This one particular figure happened to be much smaller than these figures that you're actually seeing on the image, only 3 meters in height. But as a question, I answered that question. There are female figures which have been carved on Easter Island. And I don't know if you ever saw any female figures on Easter Island, Eleanor, but I would say one thing, that it's quite possible that lots of the external appearance of these figures has been eroded away. You can just neatly see some of the hands in there, but any of the top parts of the breasts have been eroded away. Lots of these features with these, this is made out of volcanic tufa, which is quite a soft stone, quite a soft acidic stone, and this is going to react when the rain falls upon it. But obviously over the years there's been less and less fall with the depletion of the trees, for example. But I thought that was a rather interesting question that we actually got an answer for. One of the key aspects of Easter Island concerns the trees. Now, this is a really interesting area. Now, we do know from the analysis at Easter Island that it was completely crowned by trees at one point. And what I'm actually going to do is I can actually move the camera around a little bit because it keeps moving. Oh, that's a lot better. The island was completely crowned by what's referred to as great palm trees, just like this one in front of us. These could be 20, 30 meters in height. And this was a specific native species of great palm that was particularly endemic to the island. Now, it has been argued many, many times over that because of the trees being cut down, this led to them carving less statues. And with no trees, they were unable to carve statues anymore, leading to a collapse of the civilization and so on, which is now actually a myth. It's quite likely that thousands of trees were still on the island when Captain Cook got there. So that's a really interesting point. The other thing as well is you don't really need trees to carve these statues. What you need to do with trees is remove them because the trees are in the way. And then obviously you can use the timber for boats, and you can use the timber for roofs, not the buildings, because the buildings themselves are mainly stone buildings. They didn't really need as much wood as we used to think. They didn't need to cut down all these trees. So that's a really interesting point. And there's that thing I mentioned at the beginning, the mud, which we'll go on to. What we do find is, as we move on, is that just under half of all the statues carved are still to be found in and around the quarry at Ranararaku. And I'm glad you jumped in there earlier on and saying there's a lot more than 1,000 statues. Yeah, and I agree with you. There's going to be thousands of statues under the mud there. So that's a really good point, Eleanor. So lots of the things that we've been asking, and lots of things we will ask, were questions that Thor Heyerdahl was fascinated with. Because when he was eventually, when the Norwegian expedition with scientists and all the rest of it, with Thor Heyerdahl, got there again in 1955. The point it was to actually try to understand what these statues really mean, and how these statues could be moved. And again, what about the trees? How the statues were erected, how the statues are carved. But then again, with this obsession with how the statues, it takes us away from the situation in regards to the people. One of the things that must be said is that lots of the statues that you see erect today along the coast are statues that have been re-erected since. So their disposition on how they're standing, whether they're looking out to sea or looking inland, may have been altered by archaeologists in future generations. There's also another point, and I'm hoping that if you've got a little tick list, Eleanor, you'll be writing some of these down. There's also another point that historians used to say that by the 1600s, the people had stopped erecting these moas, and you know, they went into a major decline. They started killing each other and all the rest of it. And we don't really have any evidence for that. What the evidence tells us is that they're still erecting the statues at the point that the explorers get there, and then the construction of the statues ceases because of external interference. And it's also said, which is so wrong, that the Rapa Nuans actually threw down their own statues because they were disgusted with the gods and all these other things. Well, actually, we actually have evidence of Westerners pulling down the statues because they weren't deemed to be Christian anymore. So who do you believe? Do you believe the Westerners who took away the civilization, or do you try to eke something out from the archaeology? You know, there's all these massive debates. What we do know is some of these statues are up to 20 meters in height. They are absolutely colossal. So you must have naturally needed timber to get these things erect. And the answer is no, you don't. You don't need timber at all. If you're moving a statue like this has been carved, if you moved it on a sledge, a wooden sledge, the wood itself might be harder than the stone itself, causing damage to the statue. And it starts to make you wonder how these things were moved. Now, we've got a little bit of a demonstration of that coming up, but we won't do that. So, Eleanor, we're not going to do that one yet. So, looking at this as well, this is a reconstruction of, basically, this is red scoria, which is a very, very soft, very, very soft material on the top here. And this is the tooth. This is the very sort of grainy volcanic rock itself. And the eyes themselves are made up of white coral and red coral as well. So that's going to be sort of representing how these figures looked. Were these figures the be-all and end-all? Did they actually have some religious significance? Did they have ritual significance? Are the Rapa Nuans who survive completely in touch with their own heritage? Are we in touch with their own heritage? The answers are very complicated. But what we've got to do is try to understand this island a little bit better. Again, associated with the great palm. Look at, this is what the island would have looked like at one stage with these great palms that hadn't been touched by humans. And you can use all that. You can use that for roofing material. You can use it if you break it down. You could spread it on fields. You can make baskets out of it. You can make clothing out of it. This would have been a very valuable commodity on the island, very, very valuable. But we're told that the native Rapa Nuans ripped down all their trees. We're also told, for example, that there are only 3 trees growing on the island today, and none of those are associated with the great palms. And it was the arrogant, stupid Rapa Nuans that felled all their trees down, leading to a catastrophic collapse, which is something that I don't believe anymore. These people at the island of Rapa Nui are portrayed in the same way, for example, as the people of Great Zimbabwe, Mapungubwe. And how are they portrayed? In South Africa, they're portrayed as arrogant, stupid savages that weren't capable of creating great cultures. It's also said that the statues weren't carved by the Rapa Nuans, they were actually carved by aliens, which again is highly insulting. To actually say that the people of Rapa Nui were not capable of creating what they did has to be more racist than insulting somebody about their skin color. That's very racist. Even into the 1920s, even into the 1930s, if we do a comparison with Mapungubwe, Great Zimbabwe, in Zimbabwe today, historians would say that it was Westerners who constructed the places of Mapungubwe, Great Zimbabwe. It was the Westerners who did it. And it could be said the same parallel is associated with the people of Easter Island. They were not capable of doing these wonderful things, but they were. And the reason for saying after 1770 that the native peoples of Rapa Nui were running around naked with spears is it gives justification for enslaving the people and putting them into captivity. It gives justification for everything that is detrimental and detrimentally said about the people of Rapa Nui. This is me on their side. This is me singing their praises. And I know Goff can't talk at this minute, but Goff and I follows the stuff on BBC Radio 4 and BBC Radio 4 Plus. And what they've been doing on the radio yesterday, they had a look at Aboriginal Australia. And they basically said in regards to Aboriginal Australia, is that when you interpret Aboriginal Australia, you've got to believe everything. Because if you don't believe everything the Aboriginals are telling you, you may as well forget it, because you're disrespecting the Aboriginals. You've got to believe what the Aboriginal dream space tells us, that people came to the land and told the arrogant savages what to do. And then they became the Aboriginals that you see of the wonderful art that they created. You've got to believe that these people came from somewhere. You cannot ignore what Aboriginal people say. You cannot ignore the fact that the people of Rapa Nui created a great civilization that we in the West destroyed. Now, one thing I like to do with my lectures, Eleanor, is actually to disagree with myself by looking at articles by other archaeologists that might either say what I'm saying or say other things. But overridingly, the 2 texts that we have seemingly agree with most of what I'm saying. Easter Island's native civilization was only destroyed after European colonizers reached the isolated nation in 1770 and brought with them disease, slavery, and murder. More or less everything I've said. A long-held theory claims the native society collapsed around 1600. Eleanor, I'm getting to you in a few moments, so get ready. But researchers now know this is not true, and it flourished way beyond 1770. And they say that the festival in regards to the Birdman was still active in the 1860s. So that's an amazing point there. But the construction of the statues was still being undertaken until the 1770s. Really important points there. When European settlers arrived on the island, it was flourishing. How dare it be flourishing? So, you know, what we're going to do, we're going to repaint the history. Now, Eleanor, I'm going to give you 1 minute to agree with anything that's being said there and what was being said on the island. And I know that's not, go for it.
Regarding the Moai statues, they believe they were not, this is from the locals telling us, that they were not thrown down or pulled down, they were lowered down because there's no real damage to them. It's they don't they're not very keen on them being re-erected because it becomes part of, you know, what happened was part of their history.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Oh, go on, say something else. Do you
oh, sorry.
do you agree with do you agree with these dates? Was this what
yes, that's right. Well, when after the Birdman cult stopped and ended when the Europeans brought Catholicism, you know, to their religion, so that's when they stopped doing that. And that was about 1886, 1870, somewhere around there.
Eleanor, why can't you be hard work today? This isn't going to be much of a competition, is it? If you're going to agree with everything I said.
I'm not trying to. I'm only adding. I'm adding to bits. Regarding
good,
people, the origins of the people, there is a theory that it was the Polynesians that got there.
Now, this is why I was loathed. This is why I was loathed to go any further with that, because on the one hand we're talking about Thor Heyerdahl, and on the other hand we're talking about the Polynesians. But can I just make one comment there? I don't think the origins of the people are as relevant as people say, because I think the main thing that is relevant is that what did occur on Easter Island, blasphemy there, what did occur in Rapa Nui was amazing, whoever got there. But it's amazing because it was done in isolation. And the biggest problem that we've got today is that if we start looking at the DNA, we've got Polynesians that have moved there, we've got Africans that have moved there, we've got people from South America who've moved there, we've got Westerners that have moved there, and there's been a lot of interbreeding. And the problem is trying to get the real DNA is going to be very difficult now. So therefore, we're not going to do racial typing. What we're going to say is however these people got there, they did something very special. And I think that's a nice place to leave that one. And,
they have a language of their own.
Yes, they do.
Completely different to Spanish or anything, you know. It's they have developed. So I don't know whether that is a fusion of whatever. But
there is one thing, Eleanor, is that they've got their own written language of their own as well.
Yeah, they have. Yeah.
Now that is a really interesting point, because I only fit that in briefly today, which is a bit of a shame. And I'm not exactly sure I'm going to get through everything today either. But the words prehistory and history, when somebody says this is a prehistoric civilization, they're wrong, because prehistoric means before writing. These people wrote. And then they say, oh, they're still prehistoric because they didn't have iron chisels. And you're thinking, oh, just get out, just get a life, because these people had writing, so that makes them a historic people because they're recording their history. So that's a really key point. So again, this is just repeating what we've got in front of us. The Europeans introduced rapid disease, rapid decline as they introduced a disease. You've got the sense of slavery and so on. Now these are the statues at Raraku, and we will look a little bit more in detail at these. A little bit more about this text, which sort of agrees with what me and Eleanor have said. The general thinking has been that the society that Europeans saw when they first showed up was one that had collapsed. Our conclusion is that monument building and investment were still important parts of their lives when these visitors arrived. Now, you know, I said I'm going to put stuff in there that sort of disagrees with me. It's that line there. Easter Island, whose native name is Rapa Nui, is believed to have been settled in the 1200s by Polynesian seafarers. The reason why I'm going to disagree with that, Eleanor, right, and everybody else, is key to my training as an archaeologist. Now, there's a few points here. The first point is that when you go to a locality, and it evolves from that moment without external assistance, it can do great things, but that takes a long time to do. The other point as well, to evolve a society, you need to increase your population. So to erect these great statues, you need numbers of people to do so. To carve these statues, you need people to farm the land as well as carving the statues. And you cannot do that overnight. By saying that people arrived at this island in the 1200s and suddenly started carving these great statues and cutting down the trees and all the rest of it is absolute nonsense. And the other thing as well is we have nothing like these statues anywhere on the planet. So that means that the sense of evolution, the sense of determinism, let's determine our path, i.e. ancient Egypt, we're going to eventually create pyramids. Great Britain, we're going to eventually create stone circles. These things develop from that moment, not from elsewhere. And I completely disagree that people arrived there in the 1200s to a completely deserted island. And the other point as well is, is that when these people got there, they would have had to have felled large numbers of trees for them not only to start building these statues and erecting them and carving them and all these other things. They would have needed agriculture. And the other thing as well is, how are you going to get several thousands of people to an island that nobody knows about, on vessels full of supplies and all the rest of it, in one moment? It's not going to happen. And sorry to say it sound bombastic, everybody disagree with me in the break, right? It doesn't, that statement doesn't make sense. That's one thing I passionately disagree with. So we've got limited contemporary records that remain and have been transcribed, but from their context, there are one or two records saying that in fact, when those people in the West got there, who disregarded that the civilization was still going, they shot themselves in the foot by saying that the statues were in extremely good condition. So how can they be in good condition if the island's in turmoil? However, this is a really good point. Now, if we go back there, and we'll sort of agree with this, 1770, the Dutch and the Spanish get there after the first contact in 1722, after naming it Easter Island, the Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen. And then when we get to this here, James Cook arrives in 1774 and he notes an island in turmoil. Although these people have stuck to their traditions. So even after 4 years of death, destruction, murder, rape, disease, and all the rest of it, they're still within their traditions. And there's only one way they could be within their traditions, was that they were still doing these things before the bloody Spanish got there. This isn't a Spanish hating lecture, because the Dutch did this, and you know, the Portuguese, and we did this by taking diseases out there as well. Once Europeans arrived on the island, things changed, and this is what we're seeing. Basically what we're seeing one layer of you know, Garden of Eden, I'm not saying it was the Garden of Eden, but we got one layer of Rapa Nui and the next layer of hell. This is what we're talking about. Now, this is rather interesting, and we will go down a rabbit warren in a minute. We'll either take the red or the blue pill, but more about that in a short while. This is actually at the Quarry, and the few things that we can say about the Quarry, and we're not going to do every single statue, just one or two. So one thing that we can say is that there's a statue being carved there, but weirdly enough, these are completely upright alongside the Quarry. Now, if these are upright alongside the Quarry, how are you going to move them if they're already upright, if you've got to put them on the flat again to move them? So that simply tells us that they're upright, is that's the way they're going to be moved. However, this is going to sound very unusual. Were these meant to be moved in the first place? Did they just erect them and just leave them? So that's a point that we're going to come on to. The other thing as well is, you can just see there that that's a part of the head, and then you've got the rest of the body. So hang on a minute. Why are these? Why is most of the body hidden? Why is only part of it above ground level? Right? And all that comes into our understanding as we go on. But they haven't excavated many of these statues on the island. There's over 400 statues that remain in situ or erect or whatever in and around the volcano. 150 are like this, or even more. If you think logically, like just go out of this a minute and we'll come back in, right? And I've got to remind myself to do this, right? If you think about the levels of soil that have come down from the hill to hide the rest of these statues, it's very likely that there could be hundreds of statues buried under that mud. Easy. So I'm glad you shouted earlier on, actually there's thousands. And I thought, yeah, you're right, actually. So Ranu Raku Quarry, this wonderful shaped island. And again, the sense of reconstructing these, rebuilding them. But one thing that is rather interesting for me is as you look at the bases of these statues, there's evidence of wear on the base. And that doesn't make sense, does it? Why is there wear on the base? And there's wear on the base that these were warped. I don't know, we've all had the experience. I know you've done it, Ellen, or I've done it. Somebody's dropped off a new refrigerator, you've got to walk it into the kitchen. Have you ever done that? Yeah. And it never falls over, does it? It just, like, you can walk the thing, right? And this is what we're saying with these statues. They will walk to place. Exactly. Exactly. Unfortunately,
they put wedges underneath to stop them tilting forward.
You've said it exactly.
Sorry.
No, but no, that was very useful. Spot Thor Heyerdahl. Which one is Thor Heyerdahl on that?
God knows, I don't know.
Oh, come on. We've all seen him.
One at the bottom.
No, there he is. That's him there.
Oh, there's him. Oh, yeah. Okay.
The one at the bottom doesn't look Norwegian, love. But the thing is, this is a really key image, right? And if suddenly we lost electricity and all the rest of it, right, today, and this was the end of the lecture, this is key to everything, right? Now, whenever you look at Chariots of Fire, von Daniken's book in the 1960s, he shows these statues. And in Chariots of Fire, he said that the people of Easter Island were not capable of carving these statues, which I got to be honest with you, if I was a native Rapa Nuan, I would have liked to have sliced his throat, because you're completely dissing our ancestors. It's basically like saying the people of Wales, before the Normans got here, we were all living in caves, arrogant savages. You tell a Welsh nationalist that and he will punch you in the face. the point is that when Thor Heyerdahl was there with his Norwegian expedition in 1955, they excavated one of these statues, and they've excavated a number since as well, but not that many. And if you're looking at scale, you can imagine that that guy is 2 meters tall, and you've got another 2 meters there, and you've got another 2 meters there, and you've got another 2 meters there, probably up to about there. So you've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, probably about 12 meters in height. This is a really colossal statue. But here we go. I'm going to read this one out. El Gigante was the one that they never completed in the quarry, which would have been over 20 meters in height, which would have weighed 270 tons. But this isn't El Gigante, but this is somebody impressive. Now, what is rather interesting with this statue is that this again is key to my lecture. You can see that this is eroded here, and this is eroded here. There's erosion here, the same erosion as on the top of the statue. So what does that tell us? It tells us something. Say that again.
It was exposed totally.
Yeah. Now this is key. So here we go on my little flow, Eleanor, right? The little flow is as follows. I used to say, as I said at the beginning, that the Easter Islanders fell down all their trees and then they used the trees to move the statues. Absolute nonsense. One thing that we do know is that when this statue was on display, all the trees behind it were still growing. All of them were still growing. All of them. The roots kept the soil in check. So that's a fact. I don't need anyone even debating that one, right? And what happened was that this statue was exposed. It was exposed for a very, that there is exposure for a very long time. You have to agree. And it's only in more recent times that that statue has been covered up, indicating quite clearly that when Captain Cook got there in 1774, it's likely that lots of trees were still standing on the island, meaning that they still had a civilization. They still had rainfall. They still had crops in other parts of the land. They still had building material to build with. And between about the 1770s and the 1860s, 1870s, those trees were felled by the Westerners, causing a catastrophic collapse to the Easter Island civilization. We did this. They didn't do it. And you can, okay, I can argue in an archaeological angle as well. Look at that soil there. It's quite rubbly. Look at that soil there. It's a different color. Look at that soil there. This, however, has been built up more over a rapid time. Landslips. There you go, landslips. So all the trees have been removed and you get rapid landslips. Then it's not a maintained landscape. A maintained landscape with the Easter Islands, as they're felling trees, they would have maintained the landscape. This is when the trees have been raped from the landscape and there's been landslips filling in around these statues. And do you know what? I get so angry when people in the past are completely wrongly represented. Oh God, I've gone off on a complete diatribe there. By the way, hopefully, Eleanor, you'll join us for the Nabateans next week. So here we go. Easter, I know you've been with us a few times now, and you're always welcome. Easter Island secrets, stone statues, hidden bodies. Here we go. Another little bit of an article. Do you know what, Eleanor? You know what's great? When I'm doing a lecture and I'm plodding through the internet and I'm thinking, right, I need a little bit of a press article just to accompany the lecture, you know. And then on Monday, when I'm doing the research, I see the 27th of July, 2020. And you know what, Eleanor? This article's as fresh. This is out of date now, 3 days out of date, but this is so fresh. Archaeologists discover the famous Easter Island heads have hidden bodies. Well, we've known that for a long time, but let's just go with this article. Known as the Moa by the Rapa Nui people, who created the figures in the tropical South Pacific, directly west of Chile. These huge statues were carved from stone, found on the island between 1100 and 1500. But I've been disagreeing with that one date. So we've got statues still being carved up until more recent times. Nearly half are still at Rano Raraku. We agree with that. That's fine. The main Moai quarry, so there were other quarries, but hundreds were transported from there and set on stone platforms called ali around the island's perimeter. The Moai are the living faces of deified ancestors, but over time, archaeologists discovered that parts of the statues have become buried into the sediment and rock. A team of experts, you know, proving what we've been saying, proving categorically what I've been saying. Obviously, other than the time thing there. The reason people think they are only heads is there are about 150 statues buried up to the shoulders on the slope of the volcano, never moved, but they are vertical as anything. Look at that. You know, I really want to push on with this wonderful point I want to make, but I need to wait after the break to put it there. 2012, the reason people think they are only heads is that, oh, go on. Get that, quickly, get that. Good.
Sorry.
It's okay. What I'll do, Ellen, I'll mute you now a minute, okay?
So, sorry, I think it's a message on hospital.
All right, not a problem.
Sorry, hello.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
So these are the most beautiful. These are the most famous and most beautiful and most photographed. Those statues that are only heads. What I'm going to do.
I did have a letter saying that.
One second, folks. Right, there you go. I'm all alone again now. But we'll have a break in a moment. So Ellen needs to be trained, Goth. So these most famous statues, the 150 statues that are buried up to the shoulders, are the ones that are photographs. And actually, people just believe that they're just heads. Ellen, I put you on mute a minute, so don't worry. I'll add you back on after the break. So this suggested to people who had not seen photographs of the unearthed statues on the island that these were only heads. So this has been a long believed thing. So we've got over 1,000 statues that have been documented on the island, but there are very, very many more. The heads had been covered by successive mass transports of deposits on the island that buried the statue's lower half, and considerably some, if not all of the statues entirely. I love looking at this one image from this press article. Some are looking out to sea and some are looking inland. And again, that point I would like to make after the break. Most of the statues are located, as we already know, but what we do find is that as they've been excavating the statues, at the back of the statues, we actually find that they're etched in beautiful petroglyphs, beautiful carvings on the backs of these statues. But unfortunately, because these have been allowed and displayed outdoors, the carvings have all been eroded away. People's genitalia have been eroded away. But look at this wonderful image in front of us. Now, there are a few things I'd like to say about this, going off the article completely. So what we've got a canoe motif, which would have been very important to the people of Rapa Nui. It's saying, in order to carve and place the statues upright, the Rapa Nui used large tree trunks that were placed into deep holes adjacent to the statues. So trees were used in the quarrying of these statues. Well, we'll talk about that in a short while when we get to the quarries. After the statues have been lifted out, they can be warped into place, which is rather important. For again, timber being used in the quarry, you didn't need a hell of a lot of timber. Obviously, it's small groups of people carving statues at any one time. So obviously, you're not going to need a large amount of timber. That's the point. The Rapa Nui carved their heads and front sides of the statue while they were lying on the ground. then completed the backs after uprighting the stone statues, putting them in situ or just before they've been moved. The tallest of these statues comes in the range of 33 feet high, and is known as the Parrot. So 33 feet high, that's 10 meters in height, but we do have some more that are much taller than that. Again, Al Gigante. So I'm just gonna move on a little bit more. And one thing as well is just this little point here, which I've missed as well. In regards to the carvings as well, there's an abundant red pigment that might have been used to actually give color to the carvings. They're saying abundant red pigment was found at the human burial sites of several individuals, suggesting that statues were painted red, likely during ceremonies. These burials often surround the statues, suggesting that Rapa Nui buried their dead with the family statues, which is a really interesting point. I think the really interesting point, Eleanor, and I'm going to bring you back on, Eleanor. So here we go. I've asked you to unmute. One of the interesting points I think Eleanor made, which is not one that I've not come across this week, is that the idea that they were lovingly dismantled by the people of Rapa Nui, if that is exactly what happened, because there's no damage to the statues once they've been placed onto the ground. But we do have extensive damage to some other statues that have been deliberately destroyed by those Christian missionaries. All of this is very, very relevant. So what I think I'm going to do is look at this image and maybe we'll do the Birdman after the break, okay, Eleanor? So yeah. After the break, what we're going to look at is the association with the Birdman, but I've got one or two things I'd like to mention. So the Orango, which is over here, that's what we're going to look at. The island's going through a few different stages, which I want to talk about now. But anyway, again, wherever these people came from, they would have been in the dozens rather than in the thousands. There would be men, women, and children, probably being transported using one or more large double-hull canoes like catamarans, bringing with them in one wave their chickens, rats, pigs, and dogs, and food plants like bananas, sweet potatoes, taro, and breadfruit. It's believed that the pigs and the dogs in the archaeology didn't last long. They weren't suited to the island, and nor did the breadfruit grow well either. The colonists set about clearing the forests to plant their crops, but not all of the forests. The native birds, unused to humans, fell an easy prey to hunters, and the rats stole their eggs. So the few remaining seabirds retreated to offshore islets. And I've got to make this point that it was a catastrophic disaster for the flora and fauna of the island when humans got there, but it was an absolute catastrophic disaster when Captain Cook got there and the Spanish and the other explorers got there, because in felling the remaining trees would have wiped out the remaining flora and fauna of the island. It's likely that this island has seen a depletion of its natural flora and fauna of between 95 and 99%. So in other words, whatever mammals lived on this island are now extinct. 99.5% of all its bird species have been wiped out. 95% of all its insect species. Of its fauna, probably 95%. This is an absolute climatic disaster, and most of that was caused after. So what we're talking about that early phase. And earlier on with the article, it mentioned between 1,000 and 1,500 where they're building their statues, they're quarrying their statues in the Golden Age. The tremendous energy was devoted to the construction of more and bigger ceremonial platforms which contained these large statues. But some of the statues remained at the quarry. And why is that after the break? And the interesting point I'd like to make is that there is no, again, I've reiterated this, I'll reiterate this one more time. It's believed that the population by 1,500 years AD, 1,500 years AD, 500 years ago, was up to 20,000 people. There's no way could a population of 20,000 people have existed if they had arrived in 1,200 years AD. There's no way that a small group of people would have been able to increase the population that greatly in 300 years. They must have been there for maybe 1,000 years before that population grows. And then we've the huge, the pollen record tells us of great changes within the landscape over a period of time. So we've got these large Moai statues, and just a little bit of detail again. Let's just grab one of the statues, and then we will take a break. So here we go. Hang on, that's all your images. So here we go. When we think about the statue, all were variations on a theme. A human figure with a prominent angular nose. Well, that's been eroded away. And angular chins and really long ears, as we've actually got here, are usually perforated, and sometimes discs put them in them. Is a really bad example for this. The bodies which end at the abdomen have arms held tightly to the sides and hands held in front with elongated fingertips meeting with a stylized loincloth. In the female examples, their private parts. More than 230 statues were transported considerable distances to the northern part of the island, if not carved more locally to them. There were lots of villages and lots of areas where people lived. And even in this text that I'm reading out, it said that they were moved on sledges and rollers. Well, obviously, we now know that they will walk there because of the evidence that we can actually look at. So what I'd like to do, you know where we're going to go after the break. So there you go, Eleanor. Eleanor's going to interfere with the lecture after the break. So Eleanor, anything you'd like to say now before we go on to a break?
Yes. Yes, I'm holding up a photo here of the at the Rano, where the quarry was.
Keep it there. Keep the image. Go for it.
Yes, where it was being constructed in the horizontal position, as you said.
Is this El Gigante?
In the Raraku.
That's the one. But is that El Gigante? Is that the one?
Can you see it?
Yeah, we can see that.
I'm trying to see the head there.
Yes. Is that the one that's 20 meters long?
Yes, yes, yeah.
Do you know, I tell you what.
Very, very heavy.
Sizes
never got.
Exactly. It never got completed.
And the other interesting bit I was thinking about the reason for which way they faced the rows of Moai. They said that it was they were supposed to be looking and protecting the village, overlooking the villages.
And then you've got the ones that look out to sea, and you're thinking.
Yes, and there was a village on the other side. Yes, but no, still existed. Yeah.
So you have different. You've got there's Eleanor. I'm going to say, don't be disappointed if I don't cover everything today, but I'm sure we're getting through quite a bit. So anyone who'd like to say anything? Jane, would you like to say anything, Jane?
This might be because I've missed something, but if they were all buried, you know, if there was half the body was below.
They weren't all buried. And
only a few.
Natural erosion that buried them.
No, only a few.
Oh, okay.
And Jane, the point I was trying to make was that up until very late, probably into
the trees,
up until about 1700, there were still lots of trees still on the island. But because when we went there, Westerners went there, they started felling the trees for fuel, for fuel and all the rest of it. That meant that erosion then completely inundated some of the statues that were upright. The ones on the coast haven't got soil around them, but they were meant to be displayed and not hidden. And the point that I made, that the trees, lots of trees were still on the island, up until the Westerners gets there, proves that point, and that's earlier on in the recording. Right, so Pam, anything you would like to say, quick?
No, not at the moment. Thank
Okay.
you. Cup of
Chris?
tea.
Cup of tea. Chris, would you like to say anything?
Just 2 points. I would have thought the islanders wouldn't have treated timber as disposable. So, you know, if they cut a tree that did the job, they'd use it over and over again. So they wouldn't be chopping trees down willy-nilly.
Can you just stop there a minute, Chris? Stop there a minute, Chris.
We had a talk. We had a talk by somebody on the island, and they said that they built their houses of wood originally, and then later they built them in stone.
And Chris, and everybody, the point that Chris just made. Sorry to have interrupted there, Chris. Do you know what? That is an amazing point, because you are dead right. If they had cut down the trees, they would have used them. They wouldn't have just discarded them. Very good point, Chris. Anything else you'd like to say, Chris?
You said islanders had a written record. Is there anything in that record?
It hasn't really been translated yet. That's the problem.
Oh, right. Okay. Thank you.
This is right. Anyway, let's be quick. Anything you'd like to say, Goff? No? Okay. Keith?
I've got one of these Moai up in the British
No,
Museum.
that's great so far.
Up in the British Museum, and I saw it when I was up there, and I saw all the petroglyphs on the back of it. So that was very exciting, because I never thought they were inscribed in that way. Yes, they were. What about you? So we've done all the people whose mics I've put off. Oh, Ellen. Anything you'd like to say, darling?
I think Eleanor had to go. Ellen had to go, didn't she? She was waving her.
Looks like it's still there.
No, she's not. She's gone.
No, she was waving a notice at you. I couldn't read what it said.
Well, it doesn't help. Right. Okay. I've asked the gummy gang to talk. Is Karen, you going to say anything? Karen, Kathy?
No.
Okay. Yeah, we have done no a few times. What about you, Jim? You know, I tell you what, I think Karen's got Tourette's, because that just went on a bit long then, didn't it?
Something
Something that was funny there.
Well, no, it wasn't funny at all. I think Karen. I don't know. Oh, by the way, I've got so many articles of the week. It's unbelievable. So after the break, I'm gonna choose a few, and then we'll go from there. Right, we're gonna take a break now, and we'll go from.
Take a break.
Ellen,
Jolly good.
pledge the resistance after the break. Let's go. Be back now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 people today. Now, so back to where we were before the break. What we're going to do now, we're going to share the images back to where we are. Good. And where we're going to go next is associated with the Birdman. Now, this is something that I've mentioned a few times. So everything to do with the Birdman is occurring this side of the island at Orango, and we're obviously quite some distance from the quarry site itself. Most of what we do know about Orango takes place in the period almost immediately before the Westerners actually get there. Maximum, the island is 25 miles in length. It's an area of 66 square miles in total. So if we can move on, I'm going to clear that and moving over there. So what we're going to do, I'm going to read out what I've got in front of me, and then I want you to add to it. So we're going to look at the story of the Birdman. So let's see what images we've got. what we have is a tiny little island in the distance, Moto Nui, which the gentlemen who were special within the community had to swim out to, which we'll talk about. So I'll show you what images we've got. We've got the crater at Rano Kaya crater. We've got these wonderful
Rano Kai.
The wonderful illustrations of the Birdman swimming out to Moto Nui. And there they are scrambling down the cliff. And what we've got the crater there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start with the crater and I'm going to read this out and then you're going to add to it. So an annual chief of Birdman was chosen each year at the ceremonial village of Orongo. Now, what would happen, if this is the right translation, is that all communities on the island would choose one of their most capable sons or males to swim out from Rano Kaya crater to Moto Nui. And then the person who succeeded in the task that we're going to mention, who represents the chief, will be now the annual chief of the island of Easter Island. So here we go. So read that again. An annual chief of Birdman was chosen each year at the ceremonial village of Orongo. And what we do find, you can just basically see them, some archaeological remains which have been exposed at this village. So this was a major event. Dry stone corbelled houses, corbelling is when you've got a stone roof, were perched high on the cliff between the Rano Kaya crater and the ocean.
You've frozen.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Each of the candidates is probably everybody else is able to hear me, so don't worry. Each of the candidates had a young man to represent him. Every spring, these unfortunate young men had to make their way down the sheer cliff, 300 meters in height. Some would scramble down. Other descriptions I've seen that would jump into the sea, but that's probably not wise. So from the top here, 300 meters, scrambling all the way down to the shoreline, and then swim over 1 kilometer on a bunch of reeds through shark-infested swells and strong currents to the largest and outermost island, Moto Nui. So let's go back to Moto Nui.
You've lost.
There you go. There's Moto Nui.
You've lost you again. Yeah.
There's Moto Nui, where they waited sometimes for weeks. The arrival of a migratory seabird, the sooty tern. The aim was to find its first egg. They would find the first egg. The winner would swim back with the egg securely held in a headband, and his master now became the new sacred birdman, almost the ruler of Rapa Nui. Orongo's rich rock art is festooned with carvings of birdmen, sometimes holding the egg, which symbolized fertility. This was the system that was still developed when the Europeans arrived and which ended with the arrival of the missionaries. So what we're going to do, Eleanor, if I show these images now, you do a little description. So if you've got, give it a couple of minutes. So tell us what you know, go for it.
Okay, so the person who was chosen from their group to go down, because there are different tribes on the island, and the one is chosen from each one, and they would go down that cliff, and many of them probably fell quite seriously because it's very sharp drop down into the sea, and they would swim out to the island, and they would have to stay there for quite a while, in fact, maybe weeks before the bird returned, and it was they used to fight over the eggs. In fact, they could destroy each other's eggs if they were the first. But they are now to come back to the mainland. They had a little pocket in a pouch strip attached to their head, and to preserve the egg when they swam back. And yes, they were the then to become the sort of leader or king for a year, and were dressed in, and they were kept in, they became a recluse for a year. That's the climb. That's the image of them climbing up the rocks. Yeah, it's quite. And yes, and in Norongo there are some. I don't know if I sent you the picture of the village that was built for them, all the sort of priests and everybody who stayed there whilst the Birdman swam out to the island, and how they had to crawl into these, almost like caves. And I don't think you've got it there.
No, we haven't. No, we haven't.
I did send you one. In fact, I've lost them all on my. I've lost them all on my screen now. I don't know what I did.
So, don't worry, I'll send them back. I'll send them
back. Yeah. Okay. Lovely.
Anyway, thanks for that. That's very useful. It's also always useful to have somebody who's actually on the ground there. So anyway, thanks for that. So what we do?
Yeah, we stood up there.
That's the image that you see. This is, it's that idea that they're just those heads, and that is L. giganteum.
That's on the side of the crater.
Yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? And do you know what? One of the things that we mentioned when we were doing this in the week, was that this is actually on the diagonal. That's on the side of the crater, and it was the idea that maybe, what about these actually being carved vertically as well? If you carve them vertically, when you've actually managed to get around the back, all you need to do is find a fault under the base, and then you can gradually walk these things forward. So this is the point. So there could be lots of different ways of looking at the quarrying and the activities associated with the statue. When we do this, it's quite amazing that people come out with various interesting things, and one or two of the things that were mentioned was that with the many trees on the island, and still with there being a number of trees on the island up to the point that the Westerners got there, there would be quite an interesting flow of rain, which would enrich the soil, which would also be good for the crops. And obviously, with then cutting down all the trees after the Westerners got there, it would mean that there would be a famine and things would start to collapse. So that would all make sense that it was post when the Westerners got there. The other thing as well is, going back to the earlier notes, we've already mentioned it, that when you're involved in the quarrying at Raku, you could naturally reuse the wood when you're quarrying, and you could then lever these statues up from the faces and actually make them vertical. But when we were again looking at these statues, a few other things.
Can't hear you.
Right. What I'm going to find out is everybody else. Can everybody else hear me? Can you hear me, Keith? Thumbs up. Right. Yes, there might be a problem with your end, Eleanor, so don't worry about it. It's fine. Everybody else can hear me.
Can you see the picture I'm holding up?
Are those some of the buildings?
Yes. The little holes in the ground to live in.
I've actually got one of those images. I've got one. It's okay. Yeah. So those are going to be around the outside of this crater that we're actually talking about. Anyway, carrying on with these statues. So we were talking about rainfall. We're talking about trees. We're talking about the mud side of things. Now, this was a rather important point. That when these statues have actually been carved, they're facing forward. So when they're moving, they're facing forward, and there's going to be a large amount of wear on the base of the statues as they're moving forward. So all of those are relevant things. If they're then going to the coastline, you've got the process of moving the statues around. Now, here we go on to the thing that I wanted to mention before the break, and it was inside me. So I've mentioned this story a few times before, and I've embellished it. But the story, when I was actually at the University of Highlands and Islands, only a few years ago, a professor, Colin Richards, had just become the professor of archaeology at the University of Highlands and Islands. And one day he got really excited and he said, do you know where I've just come back from? And I said, where? And he said, I've actually just come back from one of the Pacific Islands. And I said, oh, that's brilliant. And he said, do you know what, right? I was interested in how they erect statues and how they move stones and all the rest of it. And he was looking at the ethnographical landscape of this Pacific island that he was actually on. He didn't actually tell me which island it was. And it wasn't Easter Island. So wherever island he went to, there were the statues and stuff there. Anyway, so he said, right, he got up this one day and somebody knocked on his door and he said, oh, there's something happening later on today. And he said, what? They said, they're going to be moving a stone. And he thought, oh my God, I'm going to actually see a reconstruction. I know, no, it's not a reconstruction. It's what we do. And he said, oh, wow, you still move stones around? And they said, yeah, wicked. So anyway, he got to the group of people and in front of him was a 5-ton stone. And there were 2 lads. And he thought, oh, wow, that's brilliant. And he was looking around everybody else and he's saying, well, aren't you going to help these 2 lads move the stone? And I said, no, we're not. It's a 5-ton stone. They're going to move it. And he said, this is impossible. We've had archaeologists in Britain, 15 archaeologists trying to move stones that are 2 or 3 tons in weight, and we can't move them. 15 people. How's 2 lads going to move this stone? Anyway, they started moving the stone because there's obviously seaweed underneath it, and they were just moving the thing along. And he said to somebody else, he said, how far are they going to move this stone? He said, they're going to move it a mile. And Professor Colin Richards said, it's not possible. Anyway, after a short while, one of the lads tripped and lodged his arm underneath the stone, and it fractured his arm. So we had to go to hospital, and it turned out that the lad was okay. And then he thought, right, and he looked at the group and he thought, well, why aren't you going to help this lad move the stone? And they said, no. The lad single-handedly moved this 5-ton stone. 5-ton stone, 1 mile. And they got to a location, and he thought, wow, wicked. Now, this is the point. This is how Westerners think, right? This is how Westerners think. He said, right, we're going to obviously see the thing erected now. And everybody looked at him and he looked away. And no sooner as he had looked away, everyone buggered off. And they just left the stone there on the ground. And he just thought, well, what's going to happen now? Surely they're going to erect this stone. And anyway, he was really disappointed now. The point of the story, what is that the whole point of what was going on was the movement of the stone. That was the event. That was the thing, right? Anyway, he went to the local taverna that night and he asked, well, why didn't anyone erect the stone? And everyone went quiet in the taverna. And I said, what do you mean erect the stone? And I said, why didn't they complete the job? And that was highly insulting. And I said, I know you're from the West, right? But we do different things here. The actual process of moving the stone is the event. That's the history. That's the chronology. That is everything, right? You Westerners think you need to have an answer for everything. You think you need to have ritual and religion. The religion and ritual is the event of moving the stone, right? And what's that got to do with these stones on Easter Island? Well, it's got everything to do with the stones. Now, it may not be a concept that some of you can appreciate, but at this quarry, at the Ranaraku crater, there's probably up to half of all the carved stones on Rapa Nui. All the carved stones are in the quarry or have been put upright along the quarry, right? Or flat on the ground or tilted or whatever, yeah? Half of them, right? So it could, people used to think that they weren't completed. How can they be completed when they're upright and they're complete? Why haven't they been moved? Because they weren't meant to be moved. The whole event of carving the statues and erecting them in the first place is the event. That's what they're about. And it may sound absolutely ridiculous, but explaining the numbers of statues that haven't been moved or are in situ is not down to the fact that they weren't perfect. They were perfect. And this is what the process was. The process was carving, not necessarily erecting them. The ones that are erected, fair enough. They could be for family, they could be for events. But the whole point of hundreds actually still being at the quarry, they're upright, they're ready to go, but they're not going to go anywhere. They were never meant to go anywhere. And this is the point. You know, we overcomplicate things in archaeology. We really overcomplicate them. Well, this is another one at Ranaraku. This is one that never got anywhere, right? This is the one that's been inundated with mud because suddenly one day the trees were moved. And this is really pristine. This is really pristine in the ground. And then you could come back at me. You could sort of say, well, actually, it might look pristine in the ground because it was covered up with soil. And you're thinking, well, that's absolutely not possible. The archaeology tells us that the real event is that the real event is that there's layers of soil that have come in through landslips. Quite a number of layers of soil that have actually come in from landslips. Somebody's left me a message. Sorry, got to go. But anyway, James just left us, which is a bit of a shame. So anyway, so carrying on a little bit more. Now, you come up with this earlier on, Eleanor. You mentioned earlier on, Eleanor, about the fact that you know, lots of these statues have been moved and they've been re-erected. And again, I completely agree with you, Eleanor. The actual process of these on the ground is the process. And the other point I would like to make, Eleanor, is that just because we see them when we see them on the ground, Eleanor, it might mean that they were never meant to be erected in the first place. So they've been moved there, they've been put flat, and that is the event. So just you know, I'll give you an example of this, right? When you go to Avery Stone Circle, they always say at Avery Stone Circle that there were originally 90 stones around the outside. And then what you hear then is that over time, you know, 50 odd of those stones were broken up and moved and what have you, right? And that's what we think. But when archaeologists have examined these holes, some of them show no signs that there was ever a stone in them in the first place. In fact, stone decays. So they've looked at the bases of these holes where the stones were placed at Avery, and it turns out that there was no stones ever placed in them in the first place. So that means that the stone circle at Avery was never completed. It was never meant to be completed. But what we do feel, like Easter Island, like Orkney, like Avery, each of the sockets may have meant to have been for a family moving into the area, and they put a stone in the socket, but they never put a stone in the socket. That's why it's empty. Maybe these statues were still on the ground or were not on a platform because they were never meant to get there. We overcomplicate things in archaeology, but one thing that we don't complicate are these beautiful carvings. What we do see with the stones at Arango is that there's lots of representations of the Birdman, the egg, the birds, canoes, all these different types of things. Carved out this beautiful tufa. As I've already mentioned, the tufa itself is naturally what basically happens. You've got a volcano, you've got the caldera, there's an explosion, dust goes everywhere, and then you get another explosion, more dust, another explosion, more dust, sedimentary, right? And it builds up in layers and it compacts together, and it almost sets like cement, and that's basically what tufa is. It's technically not sedimentary, but it's built up as a sedimentary rock. So looking again at a very recently excavated stone itself, near Ranaraku, and what you can see is, now this is rather interesting, right? This is a bit in the middle of everything that we've done. What you can see is carvings that were meant to go out, and they've been eroded away. You can clearly see that carvings have been eroded away. That bit's just going, right? So we know that there were other carvings here. Now, this is rather interesting. This tells us at one point, this whole statue was revealed. Yeah, again, back to the original point. It was revealed in its awe. But eventually, because of the landslips, it's become covered. Going back to the original point that I've made. Somebody else also mentioned, they earlier on in the week, they said, well, you look at the archaeology here, and what you do see with the archaeology here is that it's almost as if there's been no volcanic activity since the statues have been erected. Well, there has been volcanic activity since the statues have been erected, but lots of these statues are still standing. So it tells you a lot about the level of engineering that these people employed to move the statues. A representation of the Birdman as he's jumping into the water. So jumping into the water from the shoreline and on top of the cliff. To be honest with you, Eleanor, I think the end result would have been the same. Whether you jumped into the water or whether you climbed down to the water line, you may have died or you may have not. And can you imagine how frustrating it would have been to have spent a week out on this bloody little island, Motunui, and then to swim back only to climb up the cliff and then to fall to your death? How ironic. We've got just a few images and we've gone really late today, and I do apologize, but I'm reminded of a story from Dr. David Attenborough, Sir Attenborough. I first saw a figure like this on a program 20 years ago, and somebody asked David Attenborough, he said, what's your favorite thing? And he said, this might surprise you, it's actually a figure from Easter Island. It's a wooden carved figure from Easter Island, out of the local wood, and it's from Easter Island. And he said he bought it at an auction, and these were like 10 a penny when he actually bought it at an auction. Now, these are really rare now. But what happened, one thing that I'm not going to do today, because we just run out of time, an American archaeologist excavating here in the late 1870s packed up all this stuff and sold it. And all the other bits of carved stuff, loads of stuff was removed from the island. And this is how it made it into the auction. And I'm sure this would be in the David Attenborough collection when he decides to display all of this stuff. And Eleanor, can you show that fridge magnet that you had earlier on? Are you still with me, Eleanor? Hello? Oh my God, we've lost Eleanor. We've not only lost Goff, we've lost Eleanor. Oh God. So basically that's almost shaped as if it looks a bit like Easter Island. And what we've got is some other portrayals. And what they've done, this is going into the 1800s, after the island has been taken over by the Westerners. What's going on is that you're basically showing the local people as almost savages with their breasts being portrayed. But obviously, this is not what the scene would have been maybe 100 years earlier. What we think some of the native Polynesians look like. Again, the erosion associated with the statues, even the ones by the sea, there's a sense of landslip, there's a sense of soil around them. And nearly at the end now, they've actually done experiments to actually show them walking these statues. And the point about cutting down the trees, you could not have moved these statues unless the trees had been removed in the first place. But a good point that Chris made earlier on about the fact that the wood would have all been used for a very, very long time. And this is the last point here. Actually, there's me. The last point is these are some of the buildings that they lived in. These are the ones that Eleanor was trying to show you earlier on. And what we do find is that most of the evidence of their writing has been removed from the country and sold in auctions. Look at this itself, carved on a piece of palm wood. Absolutely beautiful. And these are the carvings. And here is part of a translation codex but it's never really been transcribed for people to understand yet. But I'm sure one day, Chris, as you asked earlier on, these will actually tell a story of Rapa Nui, maybe completely altering the history that even I've presented today. So what I'd like to do is that apparently we've still got Gough still with us, so I don't know what's happened to Eleanor. So what we're going to do, we're going to unmute everybody. Allow participants to unmute themselves. Here we go. Everyone unmute themselves, and let's have a few questions off everybody. Karen and Jim, keep yourself to the last because of your background noise. But Keith, would you like to go first? I've unmuted you all. Everyone's been unmuted. Unmute you all. Go on, give it a go. Right, okay.
Hey. Hello. Can you hear me, Mother?
I can hear you, son. I think
Oh,
just joined us again. That's good. Go on.
yeah, I think we're all the back again. I was going to say, I wonder if it's something like a rite of passage. You know, when you say that moving the Moai was the aim in itself, like a rite of passage in some way for people.
Yeah, I would think. Moving over to
Right. Okay.
What was that?
I don't know. It was Karen again with a feedback. So in other words, I do believe everyone's that sounded like a good idea with lots of people. That would make sense. A rite of passage. That makes perfect sense. What do you think, Chris?
Oh, well, sorry. Yes, it could be. You don't know, just don't know, do you?
What do you think, Godfrey?
Yeah, great. Very good. Very interesting. Thanks very much.
There was a lot went into that, and I really appreciate Eleanor's contribution today. So thank you for that, Eleanor. I don't know if Eleanor's just rejoined us on number 887.
Yes.
You
Yes,
missed
only
the
just. I missed a lot.
You missed the illustration of the building at the end, and
Yeah.
yes, but this is recorded, so you can watch back on it. So, Eleanor, anything you'd like to say before I ask anyone else questions?
Oh gosh, I'm a bit lost now because I missed so much just then. Just thinking. You went over the petroglyphs. You did all that, did you?
Yeah, yes, we did. We did a little bit of petroglyphs. As I said, we didn't have a lot, but we did the petroglyphs. Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks for your contribution, Eleanor.
Okay.
So what we're going to do, Pam, anything you'd like to say before I let the rowdy buggers on?
Yeah, I did watch a documentary on Easter Island, and it was on YouTube, and they showed these statues being moved with the ropes, and it looked really strange to see them moving and so big. But yeah.
And do you know what? You know, when Colin Richards basically said, he said, look, you know, we've been trying to move 10-ton, 3-ton stones in this country, and we can't do it with 20 people, let alone just moving it with 2. And then if you start to think about a sense of a rite of passage with these statues, I'm not saying 2 people could move a statue like that, but you know, some of these statues, El Gigante would have been close on 300 tons in weight. And there's no reason to say that under that mud, there might be other statues that are even bigger. So what I'm going to say is anything, Jim, would you like to say anything? He always says no. What about you, Karen?
Being muted.
Yeah.
Oh, there she is. Go on, Karen, you witch. Anything?
Yeah, any evidence of volcanic eruptions over there?
The only evidence of volcanic eruptions is basically associated with pre-Easter Island, pre-Rapa Nui. Obviously, earth tremors after, but not anything that's happened post-civilization, no. Right, so if nobody's got anything else to say, last chance. No?
Did you hear on the radio yesterday, Carl, about Stonehenge, talking about stones?
No, I didn't. Tell us quickly. You got the last word
They,
today.
they found that the sarsen stones actually come from the Marlborough Downs.
Oh, wow.
Yes,
Got the article in from my paper.
All right. Oh, yeah.
The sarsen stones do come from the Marlborough Downs. That is correct. Yes, they do.
5 miles away. Yeah.
They do come from the Marlborough Downs. Right, I'm going to thank you for your support today, and don't forget the bit of a eulogy in the Echo tomorrow, and it's online in the Glamorgan Gazette next week. I'll send those images back to you, Eleanor. Hopefully, see you next week. We're doing the Nabateans, and if nobody's got anything else to say,
can I just say something?
Can
I say something to Goff?
Go.
Goff, I'm just starting a second bag of plastic tops for you. The first one's full now.
Oh, thank you. They're coming to me. Thanks.
Oh, right. Okay.
I've got half a bag.
That's brilliant. Yes. At the moment, due to COVID, they're not accepting them, but we're hanging on to them. You know, they're helping eradicate polio from the world. You know.
Great. Yeah, I'll keep saving them.
Okay. Thank you very much for that.
Okay, really appreciate you doing that for the environment as well. That's a very good thing. Right, I'm going to call it a day now. So I'm going to say goodbye to Karen and Kathy, Jim and Chris and Goff and Pam and Keith and Eleanor. Thank you for your contribution. And Chris, I will see you all next week. Thank you, people.
Okay. Bye-bye, Daddy.
Bye.
Bye-bye, Daddy. Bye-bye, Daddy.
See you, son. Bloody idiot. Bye-bye.